The lifeguard, Ethan, stone-faced, lowers his sunglasses. He's seen this game before, but this time something is different. He opens his mouth not to blow the whistle, but to speak a truth no one saw coming. The heat of the concrete was a palpable thing, radiating up through Amelia's flip-flops even as she settled onto a slightly damp lounger. It was a perfect, blistering Saturday afternoon, the kind of day the Willow Creek Community Pool was built for. The air smelled of chlorine, coconut sunscreen, and the promise of temporary escape. Leo, her 7-year-old son, was already a streak of blue and white, his small body cutting through the water toward the shallow end. He wore a rash guard emblazoned with a cartoon shark, and his grin, the one that reached his bright, uneven eyes, was enough to power Amelia's whole week. They hadn't been Willow Creek residents for long. Only 6 months, and this pool membership felt like the final, official welcome into the upper-middle-class enclave. But Leo, who lived for the water, didn't care about mortgages or HOA fees. He only cared about the shimmering blue expanse and the way his small splashes became magnificent, towering waves in his imagination. Amelia watched him, feeling the familiar tight knot in her chest relax just a little. Leo had been diagnosed with mild sensory processing disorder, SPD, a year prior. It manifested in bursts of overexcitement, a certain lack of spatial awareness when stimulated, and a volume that always seemed calibrated just slightly too high for public spaces. The doctor had stressed that water therapy and consistent activity were vital, but Amelia always felt the subtle pressure of public scrutiny. She was just about to open her worn copy of a psychological thriller when it happened. Leo, attempting a triumphant and slightly too rapid turn near the pool wall, misjudged his distance. He didn't hit anyone, but the resulting tidal wave of excitement-fueled water sloshed heavily over the pristine, bone-dry tiled deck and soaked the corner of a nearby, oversized towel. From beneath a wide-brimmed sun hat, a voice cut the general din of splashing and laughter with the sharpness of shattered glass. "Are you kidding me?" Amelia's spine went rigid. The voice belonged to Sandra Hess, a woman Amelia knew only by reputation, the unofficial mayor of the pool, a stickler for the unwritten rules, and a self-appointed authority on community decorum. She sat regally beneath a cabana umbrella, shielded from the sun she seemed to actively resent, sipping from a sweating monogrammed tumbler. Sandra didn't shout. Her voice, tightly controlled and laced with icy contempt, was far more effective. Leo froze, water dripping from his eyelashes. He hadn't noticed the splash's recipient until the silence focused all the ambient noise onto him. Amelia stood up, folding her towel. "I apologize, Sandra. He just got a little what, Amelia?" Sandra cut her off, rising to her feet with a movement that suggested she rarely tolerated having to move at all. She was impeccably dressed in a linen cover-up that looked far too expensive for pool use. "A little uncontrolled? Look at this. Do you see this?" Sandra gestured dramatically at her towel, which indeed had a small dark patch near the embroidered monogram. It was a minor inconvenience, barely noticeable, but Sandra treated it like a chemical spill. "It's a splash, Sandra. We're at a pool," Amelia said, trying to keep her voice even. The training she'd done for years kicking in. De-escalate. "Do not match the energy. It's the principle," Sandra hissed, taking 2 slow, deliberate steps toward the water's edge. "This is a leisure facility, not a water park for aggressive play. That boy," she pointed directly at Leo, who was now hugging the pool wall, chin tucked to his chest, "is perpetually disruptive. He's too loud, he's too erratic, and now he's soaking people's personal property. This is a clear violation of the Code of Conduct, Section 3, Subsection B, Disruptive Behavior." Amelia felt the familiar heat of protective anger flare in her chest. Sandra was clearly referencing Leo's previous, smaller incidents. A loud yell of joy near the snack bar, a clumsy trip that had scattered a few pool noodles. Incidents that Amelia had always apologized for and quickly corrected. "He is 7 years old, Sandra." He got excited. "I am teaching him. I've apologized. Now let's drop it," Amelia stated, her voice hardening. Sandra gave a theatrical, disbelieving laugh that drew the attention of nearly 20 people. "Drop it? I've watched that child for weeks, Amelia. He is a liability. Frankly, I don't believe he should be allowed in the water without a private attendant, if at all. This pool is for members and their well-behaved families. Not that. She emphasized the last word, treating Leo like a piece of refuse. Leo's lip began to tremble. Amelia saw it, and the carefully constructed wall of her composure shattered. "How dare you?" Amelia said, taking a step that put her right up to the water's edge, facing Sandra across the wet tile. "He is a member's son. He has every right to be here. You have no authority to judge him or what you think his needs are." The tension was now a physical entity, heavy and suffocating. Sandra, enjoying the spotlight, leaned in conspiratorially, lowering her voice just enough to make Amelia strain to hear, which was somehow more insulting than shouting. "The problem, Amelia, isn't just his behavior. It's the waivers and the paperwork. I am on the social committee. We know everything that goes on in this community. And frankly, the hoops you must have jumped through to get him cleared for community access are ridiculous. This is exactly why we should be far more selective." Amelia's blood ran cold. Waivers. How? Did Sandra know about the specialized forms the HOA had quietly required due to Leo's SPD and the safety concerns they cited? It was private medical information, thinly veiled as a liability release. This wasn't just about a splash. It was about Sandra trying to enforce an invisible, discriminatory line. "That is absolutely none of your business," Amelia whispered, venom in her tone. "Oh, but it is my business. When it affects my right to a peaceful afternoon," Sandra shot back, raising her voice again for the audience. "And that brings me to the point. I am formally requesting that the lifeguard remove your son from the pool premises immediately and for a minimum 24-hour cooling-off period. Disruptive behavior. 3 strikes and you're out. Isn't that the rule, Ethan?" She turned her attention to the elevated lifeguard stand. Ethan Vance, the young man on duty, had been watching the exchange with the unnerving stillness of a statue. He had the classic lifeguard look, sun-bleached hair, a whistle on a lanyard, and eyes that missed nothing. He had witnessed everything from the small splash to Sandra's targeted escalation. The other parents, previously enjoying the drama, now shifted nervously. They knew Sandra was a tyrant, but she was a well-connected tyrant. Challenging her was costly. Ethan stood up on the platform, his shadow falling over Sandra and Amelia. The crowd went silent. "Ms. Hess? Mrs. Vance?" His voice was calm and projected clearly, cutting through the heavy air. "I have observed the incident," Sandra puffed out her chest. "Well then, Ethan, enforce the rules. Remove the boy." Ethan looked down at the clipboard in his hand, then back at Sandra, his expression unreadable. He did not look at Leo, who was now shivering slightly, not from cold, but from humiliation. "The rule is for documented, repeated failure to follow safety instructions after 2 formal warnings," Ethan stated flatly. "I have not issued any warnings today," Sandra scoffed. "I am issuing the warning. I am a paying resident. My word is law here." "Respectfully, Ms. Hess," Ethan said, pushing the lanyard up. "Your word is documentation for the incident, not an official warning." He paused, looking squarely at Amelia, then back to the pool rules laminated to the stand. "However, you have asked for a formal removal, citing the disruptive behavior clause." He looked at Leo, then back to Sandra. The crowd leaned in, certain of the outcome. Sandra had won, but Ethan didn't reach for his whistle. He slowly placed the clipboard on the stand, resting his palms on the railing. "I cannot remove the boy based on this singular incident, nor can I take a resident's verbal complaint as a formal warning," Ethan confirmed, crushing Sandra's hopes of immediate victory. The crowd breathed a collective sigh of relief, though they remained silent. Sandra's face mottled with fury. "This is unacceptable. I will have you replaced, young man. I will call the HOA president right now." She grabbed her phone from her cabana chair. Ethan met her furious stare. His face remaining entirely neutral, yet something in his eyes, a deep, knowing certainty, gave Amelia pause. "You are, of course, free to do so, Ms. Hess," Ethan said, his voice gaining a deliberate, soft resonance that cut through the noise. He looked down at Leo, who was still pressed against the wall. "However, while you're making that call, perhaps you can also clarify something for me." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, waterproof laminated card. He held it up, not to the crowd, but directly to Sandra. The pool rules regarding disruptive behavior also include a section on the proper disposal of fecal matter in the restrooms, Ethan stated. His eyes flickered to her, then back to the card. It specifies that any resident who leaves such refuse unattended, thereby creating a biohazard that requires immediate pool closure and a full staff mobilization for deep cleaning, is subject to a mandatory 7-day suspension of pool privileges. The sound in the surrounding area died completely. The only noise was the distant hollow clang of the metal gate closing. Sandra's face went, wah. The silence that followed Ethan Vance's measured accusation was denser than the air before a lightning strike. It was the sound of a carefully curated reputation disintegrating in real time. Sandra Hess, the self-proclaimed empress of Willow Creek social standing, stood frozen, the half-raised phone in her hand shaking like a leaf. Her meticulously composed face, usually a mask of haughty disapproval, was now an open map of pure, unadulterated terror and humiliation. Leo, still clinging to the pool wall, slowly lifted his head, his wide eyes watching the woman who had just terrorized him. He didn't understand the details of fecal matter or biohazard, but he understood the shift in power. The loud, angry lady was now small and shaking. Amelia felt a surge of dizzying, disbelieving relief, quickly followed by a cold wave of dread. Ethan had just saved them, but at what cost? Challenging Sandra Hess was not just challenging a resident. It was challenging the foundation of the community's social hierarchy. She took a step toward the lifeguard stand, her voice barely a breath. "Ethan," she whispered, but the noise of the now whispering crowd drowned her out. Sandra found her voice high-pitched and ragged. You disgusting little liar! That is libel! I am calling Richard Thorne right now! You have ruined my property, and you are trying to ruin my reputation." She finally lifted the phone, her fingers fumbling with the screen. Ethan, unmoved, pointed to the gate. "Ms. Hess, your suspension is effective immediately, pending the review of the footage. I must ask you to exit the premises. Failure to comply will result in calling community security." He reached for the black handset attached to the side of his stand. Sandra backed away, stumbling slightly. She couldn't fight him here, not in front of this crowd who were now openly staring, their previous fear of her replaced by a sickening mixture of schadenfreude and astonishment. She locked eyes with Amelia, and in that fleeting moment, Amelia saw not just anger, but a profound, venomous hatred. This woman would never, ever forgive them. You, Amelia Vance, you put him up to this. You will regret this day. Sandra spat, before turning and marching toward her cabana chair, snatching her belongings with frantic, jerky movements. The entire pool watched her hasty, humiliating exit. Amelia quickly turned to Leo, scooping him out of the water. His small body was shivering violently, not just from the cold, but from the emotional whiplash. Hey, you're okay, buddy. Look at me." "You are okay," she murmured, wrapping him tightly in his shark towel and holding him close. "She's gone." Leo burrowed into her neck. "Mom, why was she so mean?" "I just splashed a little. I know, sweetie. Sometimes people don't know how to handle their feelings and they take it out on others. But you know what?" Ethan saw the truth. "And Ethan is the boss of the pool, right?" She looked up at the stand. Ethan, having completed the security call, was scanning the pool, projecting an image of total professional normalcy, as if he hadn't just executed a tactical nuclear strike on the community's social structure. He caught Amelia's eye and gave the slightest, most subtle nod. A promise that he saw her, a warning that they were now bound by this fight. Amelia gathered their things, urgency driving her. They needed to leave, not because they were in trouble, but because the real storm was about to arrive, and it did. 10 minutes later, just as Amelia was fastening Leo's seatbelt in the car, a sleek black SUV belonging to the HOA president, Richard Thorne, screeched to a halt in the pool parking lot. Richard, a man whose tailored polo shirt and permanent tan suggested perpetual leisure, exited the vehicle with a purpose Amelia had never seen him display. He didn't head for the main gate. He headed straight for the lifeguard stand. Amelia grabbed Leo's hand and led him back toward the walkway, needing to hear what was coming. Richard was already on the pool deck, his face tight with controlled fury. He didn't use the microphone. He didn't need to. His voice carried the booming authority of a man used to being obeyed. Ethan, step down from the stand. Now. Ethan, without hesitation, calmly descended the ladder. He stood at attention, his posture perfect. Clipboard in hand. Mr. Thorne, I've logged Incident 73A, involving Ms. Hess's breach of the biohazard rule, and Incident 73B, Ms. Hess's attempt to enforce a punitive suspension on a member's child without grounds. Security has been informed of the trespassing violation. Richard barely contained a snarl. Forget the code numbers, Ethan. Sandra just called me in hysterics. She is one of our key donors and a liaison to the town council. I need you to tell me exactly what you told her, and more importantly, I need you to tell me that the part about the security footage was a bluff. It was not a bluff. Sir, Ethan replied, his tone absolutely unwavering. Richard stepped closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous level. Look, kid, I understand you've got a hero complex, but you don't use a nuclear option over a territorial squabble. You do not accuse a standing community member of a cleanliness issue that requires a full closure. That's an unrecoverable PR disaster. Where is this footage, and why wasn't I informed 3 days ago? The incident occurred in the family restroom, Ethan explained patiently. The camera feed from the main hallway clearly shows the last person entering and the first person leaving before the hazard was discovered. I downloaded the feed, documented the timestamp, and filed the internal report with maintenance 3 days ago, as per procedure but without a specific name attached, per your policy on minor maintenance issues. Amelia, standing just outside the gate, watched Richard's face flicker. He knew the internal procedures well enough to know Ethan had followed them to the letter. And you just sat on this information until you needed it to retaliate against a complaint about a splash? Richard accused, his voice rising again. That shows a deliberate abuse of your position, Ethan. That shows malice. You should have brought this to me immediately. My job is safety, Mr. Thorne. I was prepared to issue a formal warning to Ms. Hess regarding the biohazard, which falls under safety, 3 days ago, but she dismissed the staff and claimed the incident was caused by a random non-resident. Today, she escalated a minor infraction by a 7-year-old child with an acknowledged, documented medical condition. You brought up the waivers, Richard cut in, his eyes narrowing, his tone venomous. She said you referenced the special clearance paperwork. That is confidential community information, Ethan. How the hell did you know about the Vance family's liability paperwork? Ethan finally looked away from Richard, scanning the edge of the pool where Leo had been standing moments before, then to Amelia, who was now gripping the chain-link fence. He took a breath, and his next words were a hammer blow that didn't just target Sandra, but the entire complacent structure of the HOA. Because, Mr. Thorne, Ethan said, his voice quiet but echoing the finality of a confession, I am not just the lifeguard. I was the one who personally reviewed the community bylaws and the HOA's insurance policy after the last review period. I was looking for loopholes, sir. I was the one who drafted the initial highly restrictive liability waiver that Amelia Vance was forced to sign to get her son access to this pool in the first place. Richard Thorne stared at him, dumbfounded, the blood draining from his face. The connection was clear. Ethan knew the paperwork because he was intimately involved in its creation. He didn't just know the rules. He knew how the community was quietly discriminating against Leo. Then came the true, calculated shock that changed everything. And if you fire me now for enforcing a rule against a donor, Mr. Thorne, Ethan continued, leaning in just slightly, his eyes holding the HOA president's, you will be exposing the community to a liability far greater than Ms. Hess's mess. Because my father, Arthur Vance, the attorney who drafted our community's governing documents, is prepared to pursue a full discrimination lawsuit on behalf of my younger brother, Leo, and every other child with special needs who has been quietly targeted by these selective policies. He waited for the realization to dawn. Ethan Vance and Leo Vance were brothers. Amelia wasn't their mother. She was their sister-in-law. She was Leo's temporary guardian while their parents were overseas with the military. And Ethan, the simple lifeguard, wasn't just defending a resident's child. He was defending his own family, armed with insider knowledge that could bring the entire HOA crashing down. The whole time Sandra had been targeting Amelia's son, she had been attacking the younger brother of the pool's quiet, watchful guardian. Richard Thorne's face was a study in catastrophic calculation. The revelation that the young man in the lifeguard chair was not a mere employee but a Trojan horse, a law student, and the older brother to the child he was attempting to penalize had just upended his entire political reality. He wasn't dealing with a low-wage worker. He was dealing with the Vance family, who were founders of the community's legal infrastructure. "Your father?" Richard stammered, his composure cracking like cheap ice. "Arthur Vance is in Afghanistan. He's not practicing law in Willow Creek. Our parents are deployed with the State Department, which is why Amelia, my sister-in-law, is Leo's guardian," Ethan corrected calmly, never breaking eye contact. "But he is still licensed in this state, Mr. Thorne, and he has remote access to every governing document he wrote for this community, including the discriminatory intent behind the waiver he was forced to draft when we moved back here last year. Consider this my verbal notification. The second my employment is terminated without cause, or the second Amelia or Leo are officially sanctioned based on Ms. Hess's complaint, the lawsuit is filed." Title 3 of the ADA plus state-level housing discrimination. Do you really want that headline in the Willow Creek Gazette? Richard's expensive sunglasses, perched on the neck of his shirt, suddenly seemed too heavy. He took a nervous step back. He was the head of the community, but the threat of litigation, discovery, and public scrutiny, which would reveal the quiet ways they restricted access to children like Leo, was a lethal career risk. "You're suspended." "Ethan!" Richard snapped, a desperate move that was neither victory nor defeat. "Effective immediately. Administrative leave, pending a full review of both incidents 73A and 73B. You are to leave the premises, now." It was the only move he had. Remove the immediate threat while neutralizing the grounds for immediate termination. "Understood?" "Mr. Thorne," Ethan said, picking up his clipboard and descending the final step of the ladder. He was already walking toward Amelia at the gate, completely unruffled. Amelia grabbed his arm as he approached. "Ethan, what in the world was that? You're suspended?" "I'm fine, Amelia. It's a necessary tactic. He can't fire me, but he can't let me stay. It gives us a window." He gently led them to the car, Leo silently clutching his towel, still trying to process the chaos. Inside the quiet sanctuary of their living room an hour later, the reality of the situation crashed over Amelia. She paced the polished hardwood floor while Ethan, surprisingly, was meticulously cleaning his lifeguard whistle and lanyard. "You just declared war on the entire HOA structure," Amelia whispered, her voice tight with fear. "Sandra Hess is going to burn this house down, Ethan. Richard Thorne won't just let this go. He's going to target us. He'll find something, anything, to invalidate Leo's residency or yours." Ethan finished polishing the whistle and set it down with a click. He looked up, his expression serious. "He knows he can't win the legal fight. We have the internal emails discussing how to manage Leo's presence. But you're right, Amelia. He will retaliate. He has to. His only path to victory now is to make life so unbearable that you willingly drop the lawsuit threat and move." He leaned forward, his voice low and firm. "That's why I need you to understand this is no longer about the splash. It's about securing Leo's right to live here safely. Dad is already working on the draft complaint. But we need to anticipate their move." "What is their move?" Amelia asked, rubbing her tired eyes. "They'll try to get the biohazard footage dismissed? Blame the cleanup on someone else? No, Sandra Hess is toxic waste now. Richard won't defend her. He'll sacrifice her to save himself," Ethan predicted. "Their move will be against the Guardian. Against you, Amelia." The next 4 days were a suffocating stretch of quiet tension. Ethan was home, theoretically studying for his law exams, but spending most of his time reading case law on housing discrimination. Amelia tried to maintain a sense of normalcy for Leo, but the neighborhood felt different. Whispers followed them in the grocery store. Neighbors who used to wave now looked pointedly away. Sandra Hess was a ghost, removed from the pool roster, but her influence was a cold, pervasive mist. Then, the counterattack began, not with a bang, but with paperwork. On Thursday afternoon, a certified mail envelope arrived. It bore the return address of the Willow Creek Property Management Group. the administrative arm of the HOA. Amelia's hands trembled as she opened it. The letter was titled, Notice of Cessation of Access and Review of Community Covenant Violation, Case 44L. She read it aloud, her voice wavering as Ethan listened from the kitchen table. Effective immediately. All recreational access for residents of 1492 Blue Heron Drive is suspended, pending a review of documented violations of Community Regulation 2.4. Failure to maintain structural integrity and 5.11. Excessive vehicle disruption. Amelia looked up, bewildered. Structural integrity? What are they talking about? An excessive vehicle disruption? Leo plays in the driveway, but Ethan walked over and took the letter, his eyes quickly scanning the dense paragraphs. He stopped at the final section, his jaw tightening. They've manufactured a case, Amelia, he stated, his voice dangerously calm. They are claiming the structural integrity violation relates to the retaining wall between our property and the common area. It's been bowing slightly since we moved in. It was a pre-existing condition, but they're claiming our excessive use of the side yard, which is where Leo's sand and water table is, caused the damage. And the vehicle disruption? They're claiming your old Honda leaks oil onto the common asphalt. But it's a $20 oil pan repair. And the wall was like that when we bought the house. We signed papers! It's ridiculous. Amelia cried out, panic rising. The severity isn't the point, Amelia. The consequence is, Ethan said, pointing to the final paragraph, if the resident is found liable for a structural violation impacting common elements, the HOA reserves the right to levy a special assessment lien against the property to cover remediation costs, potentially reaching 6 figures, and revoke the certificate of occupancy until fixed. He looked at her, his green eyes hard. They can't fire the family, but they can bankrupt them. They're putting a financial gun to our heads to force us to drop the lawsuit. This is Richard Thorne's official response. The gloves are off. Amelia sank onto the sofa, the paper fluttering from her hands. She thought about Leo, asleep upstairs, finally peaceful. The threat was no longer a splash or an angry woman. It was the potential loss of their home, the stability they promised Leo's parents. What do we do? She managed to ask. Ethan crushed the letter in his fist, his expression utterly resolved. We file the lawsuit before they can convene their review board. We were going to send a warning shot. Now we hit the target. We force Richard Thorne into court, and we make him defend the structural integrity of his own corruption.